which, yeah.
Okay,
She's
Carl,
not
you're on.
with any time on the court tonight.
Thanks. Good evening. This is a work session of the Board of Trustees of the Village of Sleepy Hollow. We have been meeting since 4 o'clock this afternoon as the 2021 Board of Assessment Review for Tax Grievance Day. We are meeting via Zoom under the governor's executive order last spring, which allows all municipalities to meet via teleconference, and we're using Zoom. This has been noticed on the village website, on the village bulletin board, and through the other means that we normally notice our meetings. We will run our work session this evening concurrently with the last hour of the Board of Assessment Review. The Board of Assessment Review will end at 8 o'clock. If you wish to grieve your taxes, you have 58 minutes in which to do so. And the manner in which you can do that is to send an email to the assessor with your grievance and your backup documentation. That email should be addressed to assessor@sleepyhollowny.org. So that's assessor@sleepyhollowny.org. It's not necessary to join this Zoom call, but it is necessary if you haven't submitted it up to this point and you intend to do so. You've got a little less than an hour to do that. So that is your option there. I'm going to go with a roll call since we're meeting remotely, and I'm going to begin with Deputy Mayor Rosenblum.
Here.
Trustee Gonzalez.
Here.
Trustee Spiro.
Here.
Trustee Levy.
Here.
Trustee Gebler.
Here.
And we have a quorum. We are joined also by Chief of Police Boetti and the Village Administrator Giacchio, and Donna DePippo, excuse me, who's works with the assessor. So our work session agenda this evening is we will begin with a discussion item on our snow emergency zones and essentially beginning a review of our current practice. Mr. Giacchio, were you able to prepare a map of the current areas in the village? And if so, can you throw that up on the screen, please?
I was not able to prepare a map. I did send the code to the board. It's much of the inner village and good portion of Weber Park, but I apologize, I do not have a map of the streets.
All right, well then this is a kickoff discussion of that, so we can always revisit it. I've talked to various board members and members of the community to get their input on this as we start off this discussion. And I think one of the things that we should keep in mind is simplifying this as much as possible. It's a suggestion I had out of a Weber Park resident who's paid a lot of attention to this and has experience as a former member of this board. Suggestion is like, hey, just go with the alternate side of the street parking. Everybody pretty much knows what that is, and make the snow emergency the same as that, if it isn't already the same. And it keeps it pretty simple and straightforward for folks. And obviously the argument is when the snow is still coming down, DPW is concerned with keeping the roads open and isn't trying to plow to get the streets clear for parking, and they're just trying to make sure that everybody can get through, and especially emergency vehicles. So this no emergency really kicks in under this argument when the snow has stopped falling, and we have the opportunity to then get the snow off the street and get it back so that we can use all of it. And I think that's a pretty straightforward approach to it. And I would like to start the discussion off right there. The other thing that we should do is review to make sure that the code is that we're sure what the code says, and that was the entire code was updated several years ago, but you need to recheck that to make sure that whatever policy we either reinforce or change or tinker with here is correctly reflected in the code. And if there are any code changes, then of course we would have to have a public hearing on that. So open it up on thoughts on snow emergency streets.
Chief, do you want to weigh in?
Sure. So would part of the thought would be, instead of making it the alternate side, meaning that it would change over at some point, whether we do Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday, or Thursday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, is that the weather doesn't always cooperate with our code. And a lot of times the snow will start and it'll go for 12, 24 hours and it'll span 2 days. And we're asking our residents to switch over at the alternate side time, which could be 7, 4, 12, or whenever that is. But I would propose to make it simpler, is just making one side of each street, whether it be the north side, the south side, the east side, or the west side. When we declare a snow emergency, as the code is written, 2 hours after, within 2 hours from the start of snowfall, the north side will be the side no matter what day of the week it is. This ends the confusion. We'll all know whether it's the north, south, east, west. This is the side that we can or cannot park on.
Chief, in conjunction with that, then you would suspend alternate side of the street parking, correct?
Correct. Traditionally, during the snow emergency, we do.
Right. Now, I know the suggestion was made, I guess in the past, they used to put signs on the street, on the side where it was going to be cleared the next day when it snowed overnight, let's say. And that seems like a lot of work. I like your idea right now. It's kind of a modification to the former trustee's idea that he's suggesting. But the main thing is communication and expectations have to be met. And I think if we have this policy, we have to get it out to everyone. And you know, these people suffer during these snowstorms, and it is confusing.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great idea. I don't know how the rest of the board feels, but I like it.
I like the plan also, but one of the things that's been suggested in the past that I think would be very helpful potentially is a place where people can actually move their cars in the village. Because an awful lot of these streets are difficult to park in during nice weather. And a lot of homes that are in areas of the village that are very dense, and in many cases, people don't have garages. It's very hard to find a place to put your car when 50% of the parking is gone. I know in some villages, they use train stations. People aren't commuting during big snowstorms. I was trying to think of where we could potentially do something like that. It wouldn't be the Phillips Manor train station, but potentially it could be Kingsland. Just thinking about ways that people who know we're going to get a big snowstorm, parking is going to be horrific, we've got to clean the streets. Maybe we make it easier for residents who have that challenge and give them another place they could go. It's not ideal, but it's better than having them leave their car there or have it be towed if they're not compliant with the code. Just throw it out there. It could be helpful. People have asked about it. There's just not a lot of options. But there's a lot of spots at Kingsland.
I agree. That's a great idea, Glenn.
I mean,
I like
has,
The,
that too.
has anyone actually been ticketed or towed?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
I saw it right in here in Weber Park. It's a hefty fine too.
So what happened was because the storm was so bad, it took 2 or 3 days to get one side of one particular street cleared.
Mhm.
So the alternate side couldn't work because they couldn't park on that side anyway, because there was still snow there. So that's what we're trying to avoid. I talked to Rich Gross about it too, and Chief Boetti, and we thought it could be a simple solution by just saying east-west direction, it's north side, and south, north-south direction, it's the east side or whatever. Just a simple blanket, because the other issue we have is that residents have no idea what a snow emergency is, or alternate side. We get that all. That's why we put the signs out. So trying to, so
Right.
that, I don't know what the answer is, but I know what the problem is.
I didn't, one other thing to keep in mind is it's not a daily occurrence. I believe this is the first time in 3 or 4 years that we actually had to enact a snow emergency. Of course, this year we're really enacting it. So I just think with the one side of the street, wherever it may be, it will have people, of course, we'll have the proper signage, but people become accustomed to it and say, well, we know it's going to snow. They declare snow emergency. We'll prepare to park on this side.
Well, I like Glenn's idea, but I just think it's a little far for people. Is there any way that we could work something out with the school district so they can park, like for people in Weber Park to park in the high school parking lot instead?
Yeah, that's one of the issues that I think about. Kingsland has 130 parking spaces, something like that. So there's plenty of space, but it's a 15-minute walk back. Having done the walk many times from Maple Street to the Phillips Manor train station, it's a schlep, and that's kind of a ways away. I think, and that's a bigger issue. And the kind of killer issue of the whole thing, we don't really have a spot. The high school isn't ours. Kingsland we can use if we want to. The train station we can use if we want to. But the last two are convenient to folks in one neighborhood. They're not convenient at all to anybody who's on Continental or Andrews or Elm or Rice, Van Tassel. That's a real difficulty to get there.
Well, when we
But
build
that's
out
another issue, but we can do this. I just want to make sure that we come up with something that's going to work for DPW, that's going to work, that Chief Boetti is going to feel is comfortable with, and that is as simple as possible. So if we went with, okay, it's a street that goes north and south, so it's going to be the east or the west side. So we're all right. It's always going to be the east side. Then, what's the mechanism for saying, okay, now we're going to shift it over. We've cleared the east side. Now it's time for everybody to get over, move off the west side, go to the east side so we can do what we need to do on the west side.
Ken, that happens naturally after the street gets plowed, right?
It could, but if there's somebody who didn't move their car, are they now going to be towed or given a summons or?
I would assume that would have happened already. I'm just saying, once the street gets plowed on the snow emergency side, the next morning, people figure that out and say, I'm moving my car back over. So
So
I think the issue is more when we have to do snow removal, where the snow won't be removed by the next morning,
Right. Yeah,
that's when it becomes more of an issue.
right.
And you
After
got
the snowfall's complete is what I'm saying.
right, and DPW may be working through the overnight, maybe 12 hours, and they need time to rest up before they can remove the snow. There may be that little lag of 3, 4, or 5 hours
Right,
from the completion of the storm to the removal.
yeah.
So I was going to say that while it's not ready now, sometime in the future, the parking area that will be on the commons, there'll be hundreds of parking spots. And it would be more accessible to people. And again, it's a snow emergency, and we're not forcing anybody to park their cars somewhere else, but at least we're giving them an option. If it's too long of a walk, it's too long of a walk. But at least they know they can move a car and get it off the street, not worried about, getting towed. And, many of the residents in the areas of the village we're talking about have more than one car. So they could drive down and, two people and, they can drive the car back. It's not that difficult. I just think they need an option.
So,
It's really tough.
Glenn, one of the things that you bring up, with this, an overflow lot, if you will, when does that get plowed? If people move their cars down there before the snowfall, then that's not gonna get plowed, right?
Well, I think the artery is gonna have to get plowed right away, just the way many streets are.
Right.
And then people are gonna have to go down there like they do on the street now and shovel out their cars.
Okay,
I don't
I
know.
mean, that's
And
what they're
again, it's
doing
an
in
emergency.
Terrytown. In
Excuse me?
Terrytown, they give that option of parking
they
at the
do.
train station. And it's not perfect for everybody.
right,
At
right.
least it's an option.
It's something.
Mhm. But I do agree
muted,
with
Ken.
what's
Yeah.
that?
Just
I was,
Ken was speaking, but he didn't know he was muted.
but
Oh.
Sandra, please, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I like the ease of this new approach with the north, south, east, and west. And while it's fresh in everybody's minds on how to approach it, I think the details are getting captured because of that. And I support giving it a try, knowing that all the departments that are involved in it were part of figuring this out. I'm very comfortable with moving forward and continuing to explore it and put it in action.
Yep.
And we could certainly announce that we're opening Kingsland
That's great.
and see if anybody wants to use it. Right now, even with today's weather, it probably still needs to be hit again with a plow to open it up. I know later on this week, much to my surprise, the weather report has changed and we're looking at 4 to 8, I think, on Thursday. So we might have another opportunity for that. But that's something we could put into play pretty much immediately.
Yeah.
And see if anybody decides to take it up on. Chief?
My only question for that was, and maybe we should run this by village council, is would that obligate us to clear the sidewalks out of Kingsland for the people walking back to their residence? Because as the code reads now, is that they have the residents are responsible for their sidewalk and they have up to 24 hours from the end of snowfall to clear it. But if we're designating that a place as an overflow lot or an alternate place to park, does that obligate the village to make a safe passage out of the park and potentially to the residents?
Yeah, I would think it would. The sidewalk would be from the bottom of Palmer across the bridge and essentially ends right there at the gate. There is no sidewalk after that. So, and from there, it would be, as the park open. Interesting problem would be a bigger storm, depending on when it gets done, and somebody comes down and they want to get their car, and we haven't plowed Kingsland yet. which normally would be one of the last places to get done, I would think.
Trustee Gonzalez mentioned the school. What about Morris School? It's right in the heart of the village.
Well, that's pretty much used now as parking in the evenings by the whole neighborhood, and longstanding agreement, informal, with the school district that allows people to park there as long as they get their cars out by what I think it's 6 o'clock in the morning, but early in the morning, so that it's open for the school and school district employees. So I don't think there's any extra space there. I think if you went by tonight, you would see that it's either full or close to it. That is it, much like WI. That is a regular parking lot at night, and I think they're both heavily used by both villages already. So I don't think there's any extra capacity there. Let's do this. I would like to find out. I'd like council to advise us on what we would have to do, if anything, to change the code. If it's east-west streets, then it's the north side and the south, or the south side. And if it's north-south street, it's the east side or the west side that's going to be the snow emergency side. How many, what, if any, changes we need to make in the code, so that we can anticipate having a public hearing on that, because obviously any change in the code, we do need to do that. And Mr. Giaccio, I think it would be helpful if we had a map, just a village map, and highlight the streets where there are snow emergency designations already.
Will do.
It'll give us the opportunity to also look at and see if there's any more that we might want to do that. I think there are several that we never did just because it was too difficult
All right.
to work it out. Does anybody have any additional thoughts on this for this evening? Okay, so let's move on to the next discussion item. And that is the state, or rather the governor, has issued another mandate, issued it some time ago rather, requiring every municipality to have a pandemic plan in place by April 1st. Mr. Giaccio has put together a plan that's been circulated to the members of the board. The plan basically, using a template that he put together with some of the other river towns, lists what we actually did last year. So it's pretty practical because it's that straightforward. So that's been forwarded to all of you. I think, Mr. Giaccio, we have to get approval from the labor unions that represent, or at least input from the labor unions that represent our employees as well. Am I correct in that?
Correct.
Okay, so we need to circulate it to them, but I would ask the members of the board to take a look at that. I just wanted to make sure everybody understood where this was coming from, and see if there's any additions or changes you would want to make in that, and so that we can then circulate it to the labor representatives of village employees, and get this adopted sometime in March.
So Anthony, I just had one question. As we saw over the past year, the CDC kind of changed its guidelines. as the pandemic progressed. And so the plan that you circulated is pretty definitive in what needs to be done. Should there be some language in there in case those guidelines change again, so we don't have to do this all over again?
Yeah, that would be something we could certainly insert there. I think as we've learned from March till now is it's an ever-changing environment. Even what was the right thing to do in March was the wrong thing to do in April. So we just kept rolling with it. So, and I'm sure, things will continue to change and we'll have to adjust. So we could certainly insert that into the plan.
Okay, great, thanks. Otherwise, it looks great.
Mhm.
Well, I would ask you all to, it was just circulated a short time ago, so I would ask you all to take a close look at it, and we'll revisit this. I'd like to revisit it next week under old business and see if we can move this along so we can get it off to our labor unions. Okay? I'll take that as a yes.
Yes.
We'll move on to our next discussion item. And that is in our LoSAP program. We've completed our first year. As you all know, the members of our volunteer fire department and volunteer ambulance corps members are eligible for this length of service program if they acquire 50 points in a year, and the points are for certain activities. We awarded 19 points to everyone because of COVID, in recognition of the fact that there were so many things that people would normally do in the fire department or the ambulance corps that they couldn't do because of the restrictions, because of the pandemic. But we've completed the year. There are, I believe, 37 members of the fire department and 10 members of the ambulance corps who have qualified, have gotten the 50 points. The points were as required under the law. The totals, the members who were eligible were posted for 30 days in the respective companies, and members were given the opportunity to contest it, and it's that 30-day period has been completed. Or further requirement is that we as the Board of Trustees have to approve the final list of folks who are eligible for the points for 2020. Earlier this evening, we had the opportunity to question both the ambulance corps and the fire department on how that process went. And I think those of us who were part of that were satisfied with the answers we got, that people had the opportunity to make sure that they got the points in, and that there were no disagreements over the final lists. One thing I just wanted to point out for the record in this work session is that the ambulance corps and the fire department notified members in November, so several weeks before the end of the year, let people know how they were doing, so that people could look at it, make sure if they were short that they had an opportunity to make those points up over the last few weeks of the year. So I think it went pretty well. So we need to approve this in order for us to sign off on 2020 next year. So I just wanted to ask if there are any further questions or discussion points on this from any members of the board, or are you ready to go ahead and approve this next week in our regular board meeting?
Yeah. Ken, I just wanted to mention, that I think that the leadership for the fire department and the ambulance corps, they took this very seriously and they administered the requirements really well. And that was one of the things we as a board had asked of them going into the process so that they, could ultimately receive the benefits. And they've done a really good job of, keeping people informed about what they needed to do, how to do it, how to qualify, and working with us, especially around the time of COVID when, we had a conversation about, making sure that people were granted extra points given, the situation that we're all dealing with. So I just want to take my hat off to the leadership.
Well said. Any other comments? All right, we'll put this on for approval for next week then. Next up, we have a tuition reimbursement program for members of the police department. And we have 2 members that are requesting reimbursement. One of them is our chief of police, and we have a police officer, I believe, Officer Moya, Mr. Giacchio, if I'm correct.
Correct. We have, you may recall that Officer Moya went to school last year. It's public administration. I understand he's looking to replace me at some point. I'm just kidding.
It's a low bar.
Yeah. And I told him go for it. No, I'm just kidding. And the board approved it last year. He's looking to give reimbursement again this year. The board was in support of anybody moving on with future education. So they thought that was a good use of the funds. And Chief Boetti is also going on for criminal justice, a master's degree in criminal justice. I know he's going to mention it, but under the contract with the PBA, there's up to $13,000 can be used for education for this purpose. So the money is in the budget and it's contractual. So as long as the village board is okay with the type of education, I don't think there's a reason you shouldn't approve it. Chief, you want to say something?
Is there a report card we can look at?
There is. They actually have.
Actually, Moya did really well, really well.
How do you know?
I checked it.
Really?
They do have to maintain a GPA, a certain
It's
GPA.
actually in the information we received. You can see for yourself.
Okay.
I think it's, you guys continuing education. I think that's great. It's been supported by the board. I think everybody agrees with this. This is one of the easier things that, for us to approve and, encourage other members of the department to take advantage of this as well. And commend you, Chief, for doing this. We end up with a better workforce. It's all good. We'll put it on for approval next week. Okay, folks? Yep. Okay. Thank you. We've begun our also mandated police reform efforts and have a good collaborative representative of the village. And I'm working on that collaborative with Trustee Spiro and Chief Boetti. We have members of the police department that he's appointed to it and members of the various communities here in Sleepy Hollow, business community and neighborhoods. And, I think it's a good group. We are mandated to have not be complete necessarily, but have completed certain work by April 1st. And what I'm expecting is going to happen, because the chief and I have talked about this and see this as a long-term collaborative, that it is an opportunity for us to not so much look at the policies of our police department and say, oh, we should tweak this one, or we should completely get rid of that one and change this one and move those. It's more, how do we use this as an opportunity to more fully engage our residents with our police department, so that our police department has a greater understanding of what residents are looking for and needs, what their concerns are, their fears, their demands. And so residents have a clear understanding, better understanding of what the police department is doing, supposed to be doing, and how they're going about it. And a big piece of that, of course, is implementation. It's not just changing a policy. It's like, okay, did that work? You know, we need to follow through and make sure that that was, if it was a good change or not. And that is a long-term effort. So we see this, the chief and I see this as something that's going to carry on through the end of the year, if not longer, as a place where we would have an open, candid exchange between residents and the police department, so that we can work on things together. The governor's order obviously was, or at least obvious to me, and I think if anybody reads it, it's clear that it came about because of the truly horrific acts of violence that happened around the country over the last several years, depending on how far back you want to go, but especially over the last year and a half, 2 years, and you know, murders of people by police officers. And I mean, we all saw so much of this stuff on television and the news, and I think that was a big part of it. The governor's order clearly says that. And we live in a community where we have a majority minority population. And it's really important that we make sure that our policing and our police officers and our residents all understand one another and support one another, and help us have a safer community. And that's going to take some time to improve on where we are, and to address where there are fears and concerns or demands that are not being met. So that's all going to happen in this collaborative. I think we will end up with something by April 1st that just says, yes, we will be able to respond to the governor's order in a realistic way, and then continue on with what's appropriate for Sleepy Hollow. In order to make this process work, I strongly believe that we need a facilitator, a moderator in our sessions. Otherwise, it would be me, and I don't think I'm the best facilitator for this kind of a discussion, and also it would prevent me from participating as a full participant. So I've reached out to Dr. Sophie Charles, who's a skilled facilitator, has a really good background that I think perhaps not uniquely qualifies her for this role, but has a really, really good background for this kind of a role. It's done a lot of work in this area, a lot of social justice work, is currently a teacher at, a professor at John Day College, and is also a retired New York City police officer. So there's a, whatever side you may think there are, or sides you may think there are to this particular issue, problem that we're discussing, she's got a really great background to help us with this. And I would like you to approve this agreement with her so that she can work with us as our facilitator. Trustee Spiro, do you want to add anything to this?
Yes. Thank you for the comprehensive outline with it. I was really impressed with Dr. Charles. One of the things that I felt that I got out of it is she really brings to the forefront through her expertise just a real understanding of the definition of things, because sometimes we think, I'll give a perfect example, we speak about neighborhoods and we define what a neighborhood needs. And she said, well, let me have you look at it differently. Look at it as communities, because you can have multiple communities within a neighborhood. And so she really is coaching us also. When I say coaching, for myself and the mayor and the chief on how to translate some of the words to the residents and vice versa, so that we don't always have an always listening understanding going on, but rather she's, like I said, coaching us through what our words mean and what they mean in terms of this kind of context, because it's really quite unique, because you want to say, and this is what the mayor was picking up, change a policy, but a policy has a procedure. So a lot of this falls on the police department and the chief to determine whether this can actually change. Because if it compromises a procedure, there has to be an understanding of what that does. And there's a lot of flexibility and understanding to that. The other thing is, and I give a lot of credit to the police department and the chief, is there's 3 of them against all the residents that are on there. And they're really
Together
embracing.
with all of the residents.
Together with, exactly. And, they're helping us understand what they come up against. And when you hear it through their lens, it's quite different than what you see. And that's really what it's a lot about too. So thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak to that, because like the mayor said, it gives us an opportunity to participate and have somebody with experience to be watching the room. And she pulls us in a little bit to say, let me just make sure that everybody understands the right definition. And I think that's a very valuable component. And I feel like we're really showing up for this in a way that's really important. And it's just not about April 1st.
Quick question. What is it that we have to submit to the state by April 1st? And how, I'm assuming that we're going to get some guidance from the consultant on like making sure that, at a minimum, we've covered things, and hopefully we've gone beyond some of the core recommendations that they're expecting.
There is a 1-pager that has boxes on it that have to be checked off and signed by the municipal leader, in this case, the mayor. So did you do this? Did you do this? Did you do this? And we will make sure that we're in a position that I can legitimately check those off and sign that by April 1st. One of the things that has to happen is we have to have a public, not a public hearing, but a public meeting on that subject, to say that we are going to make this change in the code, or this change in policies, and then give the public an opportunity to comment on those. And to me, there's so many parts of the policies when you read through them, which are available on the website. When you read through them, a lot of it is the stuff that we're really going to look at and say, yeah, that's fine. Uniforms, and there was a lot of fairly routine stuff. There's some others that we'll probably dig into more deeply, like use of force is something that is a big issue, obviously around the country over the last few years, and with all the violence that happened. Fortunately, that's not the case here, but we want to make sure that we look at that and make sure that it's there for us. What I'm expecting is that we're not going to have a big, massive change in policies. That what we're going to do is end up with something that we put before the village, before the public, and say, we're going to adopt a policy of having this police collaborative continue forward with its work to look further at both these policies and implementation of those policies, and then making sure that that implementation is fed back through the collaborative and make sure that it's achieving the goal that we wanted to have. And so we would be in a position of being able to say, yes, we've done the work that you required of us because we looked at policies and here's and we put it before the public and here's what we're going to do. But essentially saying, this is something that we want to be thoughtful, be a thoughtful and careful, thorough process that best suits us here in Sleepy Hollow, that makes sense for us. So that's what I expect that we'll actually end up with in the very short term in the coming weeks. And then we will continue on with the real work of building a better community.
Thank you.
Well, I certainly support the idea of having a consultant who has expertise in facilitating these types of meetings. So check that box for me. The other thing I need to ask is, have we videotaped the meetings that we've had?
Yes.
Have? Great. I know that somebody spoke at our last meeting and talked about whether or not we were going to put that on the website, the village website, so people can see it. Not everybody can get to the meetings. This is a really important subject. I think people would like to have knowledge of what was discussed. I think it would be a good thing. That's just my point of view.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what we've done is provide access to the meetings through a Zoom session like this, where we have attendees and we have participants. And Dr. Charles in particular was saying, don't get above a certain size in terms of the number of actual participants, because not her words, mine, it's a train wreck. You know, you can't conduct any meaningful business when you've got, 25, 50, people on. You need to keep it pretty contained, which we have. But at the same time, people can participate as an attendee and hear and see everything that's going on, but just sort of like a work session, like we're having tonight. People can participate by viewing it and hearing it, with one additional thing, and that is that we're setting it up so that there will be an email that will be handled, an email address that people can email in questions either before the sessions or during the sessions, and then we will try to respond in real time to the emails as people send them in, so we have an opportunity to respond to them if something comes up and there's an immediate issue. It will depend, and thank you, Chief, for coming up with that. So there's a way to do that and also keep track of the comments and be able to follow up. If we can't do it during a session, to be able to follow up afterwards as well.
I mean, technically, you should be able to do that via the chat function,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to, it's a lot easier than monitoring emails, I think. But that's something just to consider.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we thought about that, but also with the email during the chat function, they wouldn't be able to think about it and then send in a chat, where the email, they can watch the meeting, digest it, come up with a question, and then email it to us so we can then respond to at the next meeting.
Oh, no, I think that's great to offer that option as well. But I'm just saying, if you want to be more responsive in the moment of the meeting, during the meeting. I think it would probably be a good idea to consider using the chat function to take questions. Because you can also set it up in such a way where the questions only go to the host. So it's not like everybody is seeing the questions that are coming in. They're basically being reviewed by whoever's hosting the meeting, and then they can read them off at a certain stage in the discussion.
I think too, that when we're saying email, it's not in the traditional format that we're accustomed to. It's set up on a Google forum. So I think it's a hybrid, and I don't know if we're playing around with a couple of different vehicles where even one of the other things we were talking about is maybe using.
You froze, Sandra.
Talk about technology. Maybe she can email us.
Somebody go knock on her door. We will come back to Sandra's point.
Okay, it's just something to consider, Chief. I can help you offline with the technology on that.
Okay. Thanks. So I would, looks like she jumped off and we'll come back. So I'd like to put this on for approval for next week. Good with everybody? Okay. And I think we've got one more item on our work session this evening. And that's a stormwater report. I believe this is an annual report we do every year. Mr. Giacchio can fill us in a bit more. I think we go outside to get this report done, just to make sure that we're always up to date on whatever the changes are that are in the law. So we don't have to submit it and resubmit it, make sure that we're providing the right information in the right format. Mr. Giacchio?
I think you said it perfectly. That's exactly why we retain an engineer to help us to make sure that we're complying with the state regulations, which come down actually from the federal government. So, and every May I usually give that report to the village board, and we submit it for your review, and we make it public. So we do get assistance from an engineer to do that work. And the board has a copy of the proposal.
And this has been our practice. Anybody have any questions about this? If not, then I'll put it on for approval for next Tuesday at our regular board meeting. Okay, and I'm gonna go back to Sandra Spiro. If you would like to try to finish your thought.
My comment was, right now we're experimenting with a lot of different vehicles, because it is so important to get the information just in time, as Sam was saying. There's even ways where you can do surveys, which I think is quite interesting, because if you want to try to manage a large group, sometimes it's easier and more tangible if you ask a question and there's 3 or 4 different multiple choice answers. And then we kind of index everybody depending on how they're feeling against the topic. So I think it's really important to be just in time, just as you're mentioning, and we're figuring out different collaborative tools that are out there, and we're going to experiment.
Thanks. Okay, we are still sitting as the 2021 Board of Assessment Review. For anybody who wanted to grieve their taxes, you have 5 more minutes in which to do that. You can do that by sending an email with your grievance in it and your backup documentation, if any, to the assessor of the village, and that would be at the email address of assessor@sleepyhollowny.org. So assessor@sleepyhollowny.org, and you have until 8 o'clock this evening. I believe that completes our work session agenda. So I will end our work session now. But I need at least 3 of you to stay for a few more minutes because we have to maintain a quorum until 8 o'clock. So,
I'll put in my time since I wasn't on.
all right, so that,
Good night, everyone.
all right, you went first, so you win.
Good night.
Good night, John.
See ya.
I'm stuck in my chair. I can't get up.
Oh,